I still remember the sound of that knock. It was soft, almost uncertain. 3 gentle taps on the wooden door that had stayed silent for years. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was a quiet Sunday evening, the kind where you can hear the clock ticking in every corner of the house. I was just about to make tea when the sound came again. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a neighbor or a delivery man, but when I opened the door, I froze. There he was, my son, older, thinner, with a little gray in his hair, but it was him. The same eyes I once looked into every morning before school, the same face I'd memorized since the day he was born. I gripped the edge of the door, afraid that if I blinked, he might disappear again. He didn't say anything at first. Neither did I. We just stood there, 2 people connected by blood but separated by years of silence. I could feel my heart beating so loudly that it drowned out everything else. The rain had just begun outside. Tiny drops tapped against the window like soft reminders of time passing. He looked nervous, almost fragile. His hands were buried deep in his jacket pockets, and his eyes kept shifting between the floor and my face. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "Hi, Mom." Just 2 words, and my entire world shifted. I wanted to run to him, to hold him the way I used to, but my body wouldn't move. My throat tightened. I didn't know whether to smile or cry. I had imagined this moment so many times, in dreams, in prayers, yet nothing prepared me for the reality of it. All those years of waiting, wondering if he was safe, if he ever thought of me, came rushing back in one overwhelming wave. My hands trembled. I whispered, almost to myself, "Why not?" He heard me. His lips parted, but no words came out. There was so much between us. Anger, regret, love, guilt, all tangled in the silence. The rain grew heavier. I stepped aside slowly, my voice shaking. "Come in," I said. He nodded and walked past me, carrying a world of untold stories in his eyes. As the door closed behind us, I felt something shift inside me. Fear, hope, maybe both. For years, I had imagined what I'd say if this moment ever came. I thought I'd be strong. I thought I'd have the right words. But standing there, watching my son again after so long, all I could do was feel. And in that quiet living room, with rain tapping on the windows and the kettle still boiling on the stove, I realized, sometimes the heart doesn't need words. It just needs a second chance to remember how to beat again. Before the silence, our home was always alive, not loud or chaotic, just filled with small, ordinary sounds that meant everything. The clinking of breakfast plates, the sound of my son humming while tying his shoelaces, and the faint rustle of his school bag as he rushed out the door. Back then, it was just the 2 of us. His father had passed away when he was 10. I still remember that day how my son sat beside me, holding my hand tightly, trying not to cry. From that moment on, I promised myself I'd give him twice the love, twice the strength, to make up for what he lost. He was my reason to wake up each morning. I worked long hours as a school clerk, but no matter how tired I was, I'd wait up for him every evening. He'd walk in, drop his bag, and start telling me about his day, how he scored a goal in football, how his friend shared lunch, how the teacher smiled when he answered correctly. Those little stories were my treasure. He was kind, polite, and always full of dreams. He wanted to become an engineer. I'd smile and say, "You can be anything, my son. Just stay kind." And he'd nod, pretending to be mature, though his eyes still had that sparkle of a boy who believed his mother could fix anything. On weekends, we'd cook together simple meals like lentil soup and rice. He'd always insist on chopping the vegetables, even though his cuts were uneven. "It doesn't matter, Mom," he'd laugh. "It all tastes the same in the end." Sometimes, on rainy nights, we'd sit by the window and talk. He'd ask about his father, and I'd tell him stories, how gentle he was, how much he loved us both. My son would listen quietly, and when I'd pause, he'd place his hand on mine and whisper, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of you." Those words stayed with me, maybe too much. As he grew older, I held on tightly to that promise. I wanted to protect him from every mistake, every hurt. I didn't realize that sometimes, love can feel heavy, even when it's meant with the purest heart. Looking back, I can see how small things started changing. He'd spend more time in his room, less time talking. He'd come home later, and when I asked questions, he'd sigh or stay silent. I thought it was just a phase that my little boy was becoming a man. But inside, I felt a quiet fear. I didn't know it then, but those were the last days of our easy laughter. The days before pride, words, and distance built a wall between us. If I had known how quickly love can slip into silence, I would have listened more. I would have held him a little longer every night, even when he thought he was too old for hugs. It didn't happen suddenly. That's the hardest part to explain. There wasn't one big fight or one cruel moment, just a slow, quiet drift, like a boat loosening from its rope, floating farther and farther away while you stand helpless on the shore. He was in college then, studying in the city. At first, he'd call every evening. He'd tell me about his new friends, his professors, how busy life was. I loved hearing his voice. It made the empty house feel alive again. But slowly, the calls became shorter, then less frequent. When I'd ask how he was doing, he'd always say, "I'm fine, Mom, just busy." Those words became his shield, short, polite, and distant. I tried not to worry. I told myself he was just growing up, finding his independence, but a mother knows. You can feel the silence, even through the phone. When he came home for holidays, something felt different. He seemed restless, distracted. He spent most of his time on his phone, or meeting friends. The long conversations we used to share turned into a few awkward exchanges over dinner. Once I asked, "You don't talk to me like before, son. Is everything all right?" He smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile I remembered. "Mom, you worry too much. I'm just living my life." I nodded, pretending to understand. But that night, I sat by the window long after he went to bed, wondering if I'd done something wrong. Then came the day he told me about her, a girl from his college. He said her name so softly, as if he was afraid I wouldn't approve. He was right. I didn't know how to react. I wanted to be happy for him, truly, but my heart tightened with fear. Fear that I was no longer the center of his world. When I asked questions, I could hear the irritation in his tone. "Mom, please don't make this a big deal." But I couldn't help it. Every question I asked came from love, though it must have sounded like control. Little things started turning into arguments. I'd remind him to save money, and he'd say I was treating him like a child. I'd ask about his future plans, and he'd sigh, "Can we not do this right now?" There was no shouting, no slamming doors, just distance. He started visiting less often. His room stayed clean and untouched, the air in it heavy with memories. Sometimes I'd pass by his photo on the shelf and whisper, "You'll come back to me one day, won't you?" But deep inside, I felt something shifting, something I couldn't stop. The boy who once held my hand at night was learning to live without me, and I was learning how quiet a home can feel when love starts to drift away. I can still hear those words, even after all these years. They cut through me like glass, not because they were shouted, but because they came from the one voice I never thought would hurt me. It was late one evening. He had come home for a weekend visit, though I could tell he hadn't really wanted to. His tone was impatient, his eyes tired. He looked like a stranger sitting in the same chair where he once did his homework. Dinner was quiet that night. I tried to make his favorite chicken curry with rice, hoping it would remind him of home, but he barely touched it. He just kept scrolling on his phone. I broke the silence first. "Son, you hardly talk to me anymore. Is everything okay?" He didn't look up. "I'm just tired. Mom, can we not do this right now?" But my heart couldn't stay silent. "You're always tired. You used to tell me everything. Now I don't even know what's happening in your life." He sighed, pushing the plate away. "Mom, I'm an adult now. I don't need to report everything to you." I wish I had stopped there. I wish I had just smiled and let it go. But love, real love, doesn't know when to stop worrying. So I said softly, "You've changed. Ever since you met that girl, you've changed." That was it. His head snapped up, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Stop it, Mom. You always do this. You think you know what's best for me, but you don't. You only think about yourself." I froze. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Me, selfish. After everything I'd done, every night I stayed awake waiting for his call. Every prayer whispered for his safety. Every sacrifice I never mentioned, and still, that's what he saw. My throat went dry. "I only wanted what's best for you," I said, barely above a whisper. He stood up, avoiding my eyes. "Yeah, well, maybe what's best for me is to live my life without you deciding everything." He grabbed his bag. I thought it was just another argument, one that would cool down overnight. But that night, he left no goodbye, no message, just the sound of the door closing. I waited. One night turned into 3, then a week. I called. He didn't answer. I sent messages. He read them, but never replied. Eventually, his number changed. Days turned into months, months into years. The silence between us grew like a wall too high to climb. I kept hoping I'd hear his voice again, that he'd walk through the door saying, "I'm sorry, Mom, But he never did, and in the quiet that followed, I realized something I never wanted to admit. Sometimes, love doesn't end with shouting. It ends with silence, and words that echo long after they're gone. The days that followed his leaving felt endless. The house seemed larger than it had ever been, every room echoing with memories I couldn't bear to face. His slippers still sat by the door. His books still lined the shelf, untouched. For weeks I couldn't bring myself to move them. I kept thinking if he came back, he'd want to find everything the way it was. At first, I waited for his call. Every evening, I'd sit by the phone with a cup of tea, convincing myself that maybe he just needed time, that he would calm down, remember home, and reach out. But days turned into months, and the silence only grew heavier. I tried calling a few times, but the number no longer worked. I even wrote him letters, simple ones. I hope you're eating well. I miss you. I love you. I never knew if he read them. None were ever answered. But life became a routine of quiet survival. I went to work, came home, cooked small meals for one, and tried to keep busy. People at work would ask about him, and I'd smile and say, he's doing fine. Even though I had no idea where he was or how he was living, it was easier to pretend than to explain the ache of not knowing. The neighbors stopped asking after a while. Time moved on, for everyone except me. My world had frozen on the night he walked out. Some nights, I'd hear the wind outside and think it was footsteps. I'd rush to the window, heart pounding, only to find the street empty. Other times, I'd dream of him's laughter, his childhood smile, and wake up with tears on my pillow. Years passed like that. Birthdays came and went. Each year, I baked a small cake for him, just like I used to. I'd light one candle, whisper his name, and pray he was safe wherever he was. As my hair turned gray and my hands grew weaker, I learned to fill the silence with small comforts. The radio kept me company. The neighborhood children reminded me of the days I once had, and every morning, I'd sit by the window with my tea, looking at the road, telling myself that maybe today would be the day he'd come back. There was a certain peace in routine, but it wasn't happiness, it was endurance. Sometimes, I'd take out his old photo album. I'd run my fingers over the pictures: his first school day, his graduation, the family trips when his father was still with us. I'd whisper to his smiling face, I'm sorry if I held on too tightly. I just didn't know how to love you any other way. The years taught me many things, but the hardest lesson was this: you can love someone deeply, yet still lose them. And sometimes, the only thing left to do is wait. And so, I did, quietly, faithfully. For years, I waited. It was a rainy evening, the kind of rain that makes the whole world quiet. The sky was heavy, and the sound of thunder rolled softly in the distance. I had just finished dinner, a simple bowl of soup, and was settling into my chair by the window, when I heard it. I knocked out. At first I thought it was the wind. Sometimes the branches outside brushed against the door when the storm got strong, but then it came again. 3 soft, uncertain knocks. My heart skipped a beat. For a moment, I just sat there, listening. Something about that sound felt familiar. I stood up slowly, my knees weak, and walked to the door. When I opened it, the world seemed to stop. He was standing there, my son, older now, his hair a little grayer, his face thinner, his shoulders heavier with years I had not seen. His eyes met mine, and for a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. The rain was pouring behind him, soaking his jacket. He looked unsure, as if he didn't know whether to smile or cry. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. 2 people bound by love and distance, by memory and regret. I wanted to speak, but no words came. My throat tightened, and my hands trembled at my sides. He opened his mouth first, his voice quiet, trembling. Hi, Mom. 2 words. That was all it took for every year of waiting, every sleepless night, every whispered prayer to come rushing back to me. I felt my legs weaken, and I gripped the doorframe for balance. Tears burned my eyes, but I couldn't let them fall yet. My mind couldn't catch up with my heart. After all the years I had imagined this moment, now that it was real, I didn't know what to do. The rain fell harder. I could smell the damp earth, the same scent I remembered from the night he left. It felt like time had folded in on itself, like I was standing in both the past and the present at once. Finally, I found my voice. It came out as a whisper. Why now? He looked down, shame flickering across his face. Then he said softly, I didn't know how to come back, but I couldn't stay away any longer. Something inside me broke, not in pain, but in release. All the anger, the pride, the The years of silence dissolved into one trembling moment of truth. I stepped aside slowly. "Come in," I said. Thought. He hesitated, then walked past me into the house, the same house that had waited for him, just as I had. I closed the door behind us, and for the first time in years, the silence between us didn't feel empty. It felt full. The rain kept falling outside, but inside, something had finally begun to heal. We sat across from each other in the living room, the same room where so many of our memories lived, and where our silence had lingered for years. The clock on the wall ticked softly, steady and calm, as if reminding us that time was still moving, even when we had stopped. He looked tired, not just from the journey, but from the weight of years carried alone. His eyes wandered around the room, noticing familiar things: the photo frame on the shelf, the curtains he'd once helped me choose, the old clock his father had given us. I could see him remembering. I went to the kitchen quietly and made tea. My hands trembled as I poured it into 2 cups, the same blue set we used to use together. When I handed him one, our fingers brushed, and I felt a jolt, the kind that comes when something broken starts to mend. He took a slow sip and finally spoke. "I thought you'd never want to see me again," he said softly. I shook my head. "I never stopped wanting to see you. I just didn't know how to reach you." He looked down, his voice thick with regret. "I was ashamed, Mom. After the things I said, I didn't know how to fix it. Every time I wanted to call, I thought you'd moved on, that you were happier without me." My chest tightened. "A mother never moves on from her child," I said. "She just learns to carry the silence differently." He looked up then, and his eyes glistened. "I was angry that night. I thought you were trying to control me, but now, I see, you were just trying to hold on. I pushed you away because it was easier than admitting how much I needed you." Tears blurred my vision. "And I should have let you grow," I whispered. "I tried to protect you from the world, but maybe I was really trying to protect myself from losing you." He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was warm, firm, familiar. "We both made mistakes," he said, "but I'm here now, if you'll have me." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just nodded, and the tears finally fell, soft, quiet, cleansing. We talked for hours that night, about his life, his struggles, how he'd found work, how he'd thought of me every birthday but couldn't bring himself to call. We laughed through our tears, remembering little things: burnt dinners, shared jokes, late-night stories. There were no grand apologies, no dramatic promises, just truth, simple, human, healing truth. When the clock struck midnight, I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't need to be spoken loudly. Sometimes, it's just 2 people sitting across a small table, sharing tea, and finally daring to look each other in the eyes again. And that night, for the first time in many years, my house didn't feel empty. It felt alive, filled with the quiet sound of hearts finding their way back home. Morning came softly, with a pale light seeping through the curtains. For the first time in years, I woke up to the sound of another heartbeat in the house. My son was here. The thought alone felt like a prayer answered quietly, tenderly. I moved around the kitchen slowly, careful not to wake him. The kettle began to hum, the scent of tea leaves filled the air, and I found myself smiling, the same smile I used to wear when he was a boy, running late for school. The years between us suddenly felt smaller, like a long dream fading at dawn. When he walked in, his hair still damp from a shower, I almost gasped, not because of how much he had changed, but because of how much he was still the same. That same familiar look when he smiled, that same gentle nod before sitting at the table. "I made your favorite," I said softly. He looked at the plate and laughed, a quiet, disbelieving laugh. "You still remember?" "How could I forget?" I said. "A mother remembers everything." We ate in silence for a few moments, the kind of silence that no longer felt heavy. The rain from the night before had stopped, and sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, catching on the steam rising from our cups. It was a simple morning, but to me, it felt sacred. After breakfast, he helped me water the plants outside. He told me stories about his job, his travels, how hard some years had been. I listened, not as a mother who wanted to fix things, but as a woman grateful just to hear her son's voice again. At one point, he stopped and said quietly, "You know, Mom, I used to think coming back would be harder, but it feels like I never really left." I looked at him, my heart full. "That's because you never did," I said. "You've always been here, even when you weren't." We stood there for a while, not saying much. The breeze was gentle, the world calm. I realized then that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened, it's about remembering without pain. Later, As he packed a small bag to leave for work again, he turned to me at the door. "I'll come back soon," he promised. This time, I believed him. When the door closed behind him, the house didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful, as if it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for years. I sat by the window with my tea, watching the road, but not waiting anymore. I didn't need to. Somewhere in the quiet, I whispered to myself, "Love never really leaves, it just waits, until we're ready to find it again." And as the morning light filled the room, I realized something simple yet profound. Sometimes, the hardest goodbyes are the ones that teach us how to welcome love back when it finally finds its way home.